Hello everyone, and welcome to D20 in Disguise, your source for expertise on world building, storytelling, and miniature making. In today's video, we're going to be discussing how to make specific people, places, ideas, and other things memorable in your players' minds. Now, this is a skill that is very hard to master as a game master around the table, so I hope these tips are in some way helpful. If you do end up enjoying today's video, then please be sure to hit that like button, and that subscribe button, and that notification bell so you don't miss a single one of my uploads. But without further ado, let's get right into today's video. Welcome to D20 in Disguise. Making things stick in your players' minds is one sign of a truly skillful game master. Whether it's an NPC, a location, or just a memorable moment in general, it can be really hard to guess what's going to be retained in your players' memories after the session is over. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't some steps you can take to better the chances of something becoming unforgettable in your players' minds. In my experience, I've found 3 reliable ways to better the chances of something remaining memorable. Through trial and error, through an unexpected shift, or through a build-up. Let's start by discussing trial and error and how that struggle fits into a GM's fight for memorability around the table. Every group of players is going to be different in one way or another. Whether that's because they have different preferences, some groups prefer combat, some groups prefer social interactions, and some groups prefer just plain exploration, or whether that's something else. When you first start running sessions for a specific group of people, you're not going to know their preferences and their interests and their special little quirks right off the bat. This is where the process of trial and error comes in. As you run more and more sessions for a given group and learn their interests, learn their preferences, learn their personalities, that means you will know them better to create future sessions. And that means that you will know what they enjoy in a game. For example, if most of the players in a group really enjoy combat, that means that creating a really memorable and interesting combat encounter has a much better chance of sticking out in their minds than an interesting and intriguing social encounter. Now, of course, this isn't a perfect rule. That doesn't mean that a social encounter can't remain in those players' minds, but it does mean that it has a better chance of succeeding. In short, once you start to get to know your players better, then that means that you're going to be able to create sessions and people and places and things and ideas that better suit what they enjoy in a tabletop game and their preferences and their style. Of course, this isn't the only way that you can provide more consistent, memorable moments throughout your campaigns, your one-shots, and your sessions. As I kind of mentioned earlier, sometimes throwing your players a curveball can produce very interesting, chaotic, and memorable moments in your sessions. When I start planning a new campaign, session, one-shot, etc., I usually aim to produce a consistent mood and genre. For example, I myself really love a dark fantasy mood or a dark fantasy setting for a game. However, if you make a sudden, just jarring change, jarring shift from that mood, it can produce interesting results. For example, I just ran a session where a group of player characters were adventuring through the Feywild. They had just reached a large city called Fail. Now, this city was full of interesting people, places, diverse cultures, and was very cool and high fantasy. However, when a strange turn of events came along, and an old man stumbling across the street, suddenly hands the characters a letter and then dies on the street. The session suddenly took a turn for the worse. Through this letter, they were implored to cure someone, the son of the man who had died, in a strange mansion called the Scarlet Estate. When they began to adventure through the mansion, I implemented some homebrew rules which I had cooked up just recently. These rules introduced mechanics like stress level and light level, and the players constantly were under the stress of keeping a burning torch on them because magical light no longer worked, and the stress level of the player characters was slowly building up as they saw terrible, grotesque abominations before them. Towards the end of the dungeon, one of the player characters actually became irrational and hopeless, thinking that they would never make it out of this dungeon alive, and making irrational decisions left and right, not knowing what they should do. Not only did I really enjoy describing this terrible dark dungeon, and that the players enjoyed role-playing their slowly deteriorating player characters, they also mentioned to me after the session that they themselves had become stressed out because of the dungeon. And I think that's a clear sign that that dungeon crawl is going to remain very memorable in their minds for sessions to come. Now, of course, there's no way to tell if this dungeon crawl is actually going to remain memorable in my players' minds because it just happened, but I think there's a high chance that it will definitely stick in their minds for at least a while. Of course, you can also do this in reverse. You can have this dark, dismal setting and just suddenly shift to this bright, high fantasy setting. Now, you'll have to compensate because the players probably won't trust it. But that in itself is still memorable, is it not? And one last parting note for causing a dramatic shift in your game's mood. You don't want to do this too much. If you keep switching back and forth between moods, it's going to become way too chaotic to keep track of, and you're going to lose all cohesion on the theme and the mood of the game as a whole. Last but not least, we have a truly classic way to make something in your campaign unforgettable. Building up to it. For example, many final bosses in video games and movies and books and many other medias use a build-up to slowly build up that boss and hype up the player, reader, or watcher. And in the end, that does make the fight that much more memorable, if you do it right. We can also use this trick of a build-up with a multitude of different tools to spice it up and take it in a new direction that you might not inherently anticipate. Some of my favorite tools to use in tandem and use with that build-up are rumors, dreams and visions, and a slow progression of a big bad's master plan, which slowly builds up and accumulates to the final fight. For example, I actually used two of those tools in a session that I ran for the same group that I previously mentioned with the dark, horrific mansion. In that campaign, around the 4th session out of 15 sessions of the campaign, the player characters began to have strange visions. Soon, a scimitar-wielding silhouette became a common image in these visions, and that ended up being the final boss of the campaign. And that is one way which you can use those visions and dreams to build up to something, namely a final boss fight. I also used the slow progression of a master plan in that same campaign. Now, in that campaign, the main villain's goal was to collect a certain one-of-a-kind magical artifact. Now, over the course of the campaign, that villain, through her different minions and lackeys, took many different steps to find that tome, that book, that magical artifact. And the players were right in the middle of all of those steps. Step by step, the villain was taking their plan step by step to complete their goal. And that slowly built up as the goal finally started to come into sight for the villain. And the final boss fight was in the nick of time, right before the plan, the goal was going to be accomplished. That in itself is also a build-up that I used in that given campaign. And that just about covers it on how to make people, places, and moments in your tabletop sessions truly memorable. Now, of course, this is just a short list of tips which I have personally used in my experience. And of course, there's many other ways to achieve this goal. So, if you have any more thoughts which you'd like to share on this topic, be sure to post them down in the comments. And once again, if you did enjoy today's video, then please be sure to hit all of the buttons down below. It really does help out the channel. Anyway, you all have a great day. Keep on creating, stay safe, and I will see you in the next video.